I think the Venn diagram of Barnes & Noble workers is gay and theater kid, and it's actually like a circle. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to film today's video. It is a guide on how to get hired at Barnes & Noble, what working at Barnes & Noble looks like, and any other Barnes & Noble / bookseller related questions. I wanted to film this video for the longest time since I got hired there. My friend here on this platform, Nicole from Cup of Nicole, filmed actually a video on a Barnes & Noble Q&A. I love that video so much. That's a video I watched when I was like preparing for my interview at Barnes & Noble and how I got hired, so it'll be linked down below. Please go check Nicole out. She's a gem. I love her so much. Aside from that, I went on my Instagram story and I asked on Twitter if you guys had any questions getting hired at Barnes & Noble Q&A, bookseller Q&A, anything in that like area. And I got a lot of questions from you guys. I also have a few of my notes down here on just working there and what that was like. It's going to be separated into 3 sections. The first section will be like the interview process, tips and tricks, and what my interview looked like, what you can do to prepare for your interview. The second half of it will be more like what working there is like the pros and the cons and like what you can expect, I guess, as a bookseller. And the last third is questions you guys asked me and what you want to know about working there. I don't want to make this video too long because I can definitely make a part 2 and definitely answer like more specific questions in the comments if you have any. So the first most popular question is, how do I get hired? So I don't know if this is in every area, but the Barnes & Noble in my area is super popular. A lot of people go to it. It's kind of like the center point of my county, and the hiring process is virtually invisibly known to like not really hire anyone. So when I even told people I got hired at Barnes & Noble, they congratulated me and they're like, how'd you even accomplish that? So I don't know if it's just my area, but it is a very like strenuous and much more long hiring process than I think of other places I've worked at. In retrospect, it's relatively simple. You go on the Barnes & Noble website, you select the location you want to work at, and you click bookseller, and then you put in an application, and then eventually they call you, you schedule an interview and things like that. Applying online is super simple. You basically put a cover letter, your resume, and then like past work experiences. They kind of have their own website. I don't know if you've ever applied on like Indeed or one of those quick job websites. So that's kind of what it's like, but instead it's on the Barnes & Noble website. Let me tell you what I did, which I think gave me a leg up even before the interview even happened. One, my cover letter and resume are good. They're really good. What I can suggest to you guys is you look up cover letter, resume templates. Some colleges usually have like resume and cover letter templates too. All you do is just input information. Like that is as simple as it gets. Make sure the past resume experience on your resume is not blank. Literally anything could prepare and build you for this interview. I previously worked in food service, which I think was a plus. I've also tutored. I've also worked at multiple internships and other leadership positions which show that I am qualified. I volunteer at my local library, and I run my school's book club and am vice president of their National English Honor Society. So kind of shown through my resume and the way I curate my resume that I really wanted to work there. I am really good with that kind of stuff, like cover letters and resumes and interviews and job experiences and all of that. So to me, it just felt like second nature and what I needed to know for the job. But if you don't know, I would suggest that you polish up your resume, you polish up your cover letter. You can even put babysitting. You can even put interning for your mom's company. Just something that you can get a past work experience talking about, and you can adapt the skills from that experience into the Barnes & Noble. And then another thing I did before the interview itself is you have to call the store. That is very important. You call the store and say, hey, I applied online. Please let me know if there's anything to do. Will you please write my name down? Can I speak to a manager? And make sure they know that you are on there, because you can just apply on any website and it's up to the manager to check if they're even like gonna look at it. So if you don't call, you probably will not get hired. I do this for every job and it's really important, or else they will not look at it. It's up to you to know that you spoke with the manager and they know your resume and your cover letter and your application is there. So when they're hiring, they immediately know and they can recognize like, oh, I know this person applied, and they call the store. So it's kind of like an extra step. Next is interview tips and how my interview went. I don't think I'm going to be super helpful in this section because I love interviewing. Like that is my thing. I would interview for a living if that is possible because I just love doing it. It's like a hobby of mine. I think interviews just come naturally to me, but I'll tell you what my interview looked like and maybe you can adapt your skills to that. First, I would look up bookseller / retail questions. I do that before any interview in whatever field I'm going in. Since I was going into retail at Barnes & Noble, I looked at popular like retail questions and interviews. And that gives you a very specific guideline. And I need specific guidelines in order to do anything. You don't need to memorize these answers because most of these answers are just common sense and what would you do in problem / solution situations. Many of the questions I looked at were, what would you do if a customer was mad? What would you do if you didn't have a discount on an item? What would you do if you couldn't couldn't find an item and a customer really wanted, you know? And what's really helpful is that these websites give you answers that you can build off on. What I like to do is use these answers for reference, but then also use my knowledge and my past work experience and what I would do in this situation. So it's kind of like a combination. My interview went great. I applied to Barnes & Noble at the end of January, like beginning of February. They called me like 2 weeks into February. They called me and they were looking for booksellers, and they're like, can you come into an interview next week? And I said, sure. Or maybe it was that week, and I said, sure. The interview went great, and I'll tell you what we talked about in the interview. And then I was working a previous job at the time, so I told them I'll need to start in March. However, they called me like a week or a few days after my interview, and they're like, can you actually start sooner? And I'm like, sure, why the hell not? Then I was working 2 jobs for the later half of February, which was like the worst idea ever. I think you can gauge at the end of the interview how well it went for you to get the job or not. For me, my interview went great, so I kind of knew I got the job, so it wasn't a surprise when they called me and asked me to start. On the actual interview itself, it was very like simple-ish questions, like why do you want to work here? Why do you think you would be a good asset to the team? And much more like Barnes & Noble related questions and not really broad retail questions. At least the Barnes & Noble I worked at and Barnes & Nobles across the world, book talk is a huge thing that caused sales to increase. So the fact that I was young and I did read and I know about book talk was, I think, a great factor in me getting hired there. As I said before, I volunteered at my local library. I knew how to shelve books. I love books. I was a reader myself. We talked about books at the interview. I asked her favorite book. She asked me mine. I don't remember specific questions, but one of them was like, what if a customer read Verity, because Verity is a very popular book talk book by Colleen Hoover, what would you recommend them after? And then my answer was that, well, did the customer like the romance aspect of Verity, or did they like the thriller aspect? Because if they like the thriller aspect, I could recommend them Gone Girl, which is my favorite thriller of all time. Or if they like the romance aspect, I would recommend them Colleen Hoover. And my favorite Colleen Hoover books are All Your Perfects and Without Merit. So it's kind of like, what would you do in that type of situation? So that was one of my interview questions, and some more questions like that, like put you on the spot and say, what would you do with this customer? Would you ask for help from a manager in this situation? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you expect from working here? And things like that. Now I'm just gonna lay down the list of reasons of why I think I got hired, and you can see if you match that. 1, my past work experience. I worked in food service before. I know how to deal with customers. I love dealing with customers. 2, I think my interview went well. I love interviews. I think interviews are super easy for me. 3, I really showed that I wanted to work there. With my previous work experience working in the library, being in National English Honor Society, and being book club president, and just love reading books in general, I think that was very prominent, because my manager told me anybody could be hired in retail to sell items, but not everybody could recommend these books to customers. Then another factor is that I knew someone who worked in the cafe in Barnes & Noble, and it's connected, like the cafe and being a barista there. So I guess that was like a plus that I knew someone in that industry, but again, I don't think it is like necessary. That's why I really haven't mentioned it, but it did help because she was a friend of mine. She was in book club with me. She was in National English Honor Society, and that really helped because I do love reading, and I think that showed. And the last tip I want to give about the interview is you always ask a question after. To me, I ask a minimum of 2 questions if I didn't have any during the interview. My questions were, I think, really vague because I kind of made them up on the spot. One of them was, where do you see me working at Barnes & Noble? Like, what do you expect me to do? And she told me she saw me on the floor because I love talking to customers. And then my second question was, is there anything about me that I haven't told you, or anything else you want to know about me before you make a decision? It went pretty well. We interviewed in the cafe. It was like pretty short, like 15 minutes or so. Nothing too major. We scheduled a time beforehand, so it's not like it was a surprise or something. The BookTube channel, I think, was also a plus because they actually watched it, which is like something I keep on my resume, but I don't expect anybody to actually look at. So that was a little bit nerve-wracking knowing they watched my videos, so hey. Now we're going to the section of what it's like working there. I'm gonna be really transparent with my pay. I got paid $10 an hour. That was like a pretty much a bookseller, like across the board, all booksellers, when you start, you get paid there. I think there's like some sort of increase, but I haven't worked there long enough to where that's like prominent for me, at least. I think baristas get more, maybe 11 an hour. I don't really know. My discount was really nice. It was 40% off books, and that includes 40% off in the cafe. It was so nice going to Starbucks and getting like a whole venti for like $4. However, I think in like movies and albums and that kind of stuff, it was either like 20% off, maybe even 30 or 10. So I'm going to start with the negatives because I think there's a lot less cons than there are pros. In fact, these cons are really minuscule compared to my other jobs. So I think the biggest negative for me was just working with adults. And I don't mean like the adults here were bad or anything. It was just a really weird power dynamic. I think all of my coworkers were nice and lovely, and I had like a really nice time knowing all of them. It's really weird when you're like an 18-year-old working the same position as like someone in their 20s or 30s. It was just really weird coming into work and like having to work with real grown adults who had lives and families and kids and multiple jobs. It was definitely a learning curve trying to get past that. I don't really think I ever did. Another thing is working there's like a few jobs you're assigned. There's floor, which means you're helping the customers, you're managing the customer service check, looking up stuff on Bookmaster, which is like the site we use to look up books in our system. And usually you're also putting books out on the floor. Next, there's cash or cashier, which is exclusively cashier, and you're just behind the cash register and you're ringing up sales and things like that. If you're on the floor, you can like trade in and become cash if they need backup, but if you're cash, you don't go out on the floor. And then the last thing, which is usually reserved for like less busy days, receiving, which you take in shipments and like mark stuff and label stuff and like sort them and stuff like that. Like I never had to do that. Management and people in higher positions did. Those are the 3 positions, and I'm gonna say cash was just the hardest personally for me. When I worked in food service, I was much more of the on-the-go person. I never really did register. When I did register, I did regret it and I hated it. But being on cash, that's like strictly all you do. It was a learning curve knowing where all the buttons were, and it honestly took me like a few weeks. So when you go work at Barnes & Noble, if it takes you some time to learn cash, don't worry about it. It took me sometimes, and sometimes I would just hate being there. And by like the end of the month, like I loved working there, and I would even ask to work on cash the whole shift. And then lastly, like management is not bad or anything. I don't know why I'm really putting the con. I think I'm going to put in the neutral. To me, there is a general manager, an assistant manager, and then 3 key holders. Key holders are people that can close the store and open the store, and they're usually like the manager on duty, I guess. And I love them. The key holders were great. Management was nice too. Scheduling was a bit rough because we use this app called Dayforce, and Dayforce like plans out your schedule 3 weeks in advance, and it's kind of just hard like trading shifts and communicating with your coworkers. But I think that's just like a my location thing. I'm sure you guys will be using a better app to communicate shifts and stuff like that, especially when you're a new person and you're like trying to trade shifts and you don't have everyone's number. It's a hassle, and sometimes you just have to call the store and be like, I can't come in. I never did that. I was a great employee, as I usually am. Now we're going on the positives, and I think there are so many positives that I could honestly make a part 2 on this. One is that it was a very lax work environment compared to anything I've ever worked in. Food service is always on the go, no time in breaks or in between, and I do like that. Like I do like working constantly. I think that was very apparent when I worked there because I never stood around like some of the booksellers there. Super lax, and sometimes you could just stand at customer service and like pretend like you're doing stuff. I've seen my coworkers do that. If you're not ringing anybody up, nobody really expects you to do anything. You can literally just stand there. But it was like weirdly lax because I personally always like doing stuff. Next, I would say another positive was my coworkers. They were all nice. I got along with all of them. Nobody I didn't really want to spend any time with. I was scared of like some managers and like higher employment, but as long as you do you and you're a great employee and you're learning and at least there's an effort that you're trying, you'll be fine. You'll have a great time. Another positive was a discount, that 40% off. I used it to buy so many gifts. I used it to buy so many games. It's the best job ever. I love books. I love being around people. I've been going to this Barnes & Noble ever since I was a kid, so it's like really surreal. Okay, lastly, we're gonna go on to questions that you guys asked me. I don't really have answers for these questions, so I'm just gonna be reading them and give you like the first thought I have in mind. The first is it a good first job and how qualified should I be? I'm gonna say yes, it's a great first job if you have like some sort of experience doing something. Even if it's leading a club at your school, being like a member of an organization, it will be a learning curve for you. I'm really glad that I worked in food service and I had previous experience talking to customers, ringing up sales, and doing that sort of classic minimum wage job thing. However, I do think it's a great first job if you love books and you love being in that environment. Barnes & Noble is exactly what Barnes & Noble sounds like. You're working at a bookstore. And how qualified should I be? I'm gonna say I don't think you'll get hired if you don't have any like past work experience doing something related to customer service or somewhere that puts you in some sort of leadership position, mainly because there's other candidates that do have that experience. I'm not gonna say don't apply if you haven't worked anywhere yet. I just want you to play your skills in a way that makes you seem like you're more qualified than you actually are. Oh, this is a great question. It's how do you decide what to put out on the floor? I never thought about this till I worked there. So here's an example of what we put on the floor. This is my manga table that I helped set up. Obviously, I helped set this table up. So what we do at Barnes & Noble is that I don't know if it's like corporate mandated or something, but we do have a binder of popular books in that specific section. So some of our books were like chick lit, beach read, TikTok, manga. Maybe our store makes it and we get like inspiration from other stores and like a corporate wide network. However, we do have a list of books that we can put on that table because they're popular. We don't just put like random books on that table. We need people to buy them. We also have tables that are like 50% off, like buy one, get one. We also have like our book club pick of the month. However, if it's a more popular table like TikTok or manga or sci-fi fantasy, we do have a list that we put on there. And how we set it up is we pyramid it. So if you look in this video, you can see how the more quantity of books are are in the back and in the middle, so it's kind of like a pyramid, and the lesser quantity are on the outside, so you can just like grab it. They do expect us to know like some sort of books that are on this table, like our book club pick. We do have to read like every month what the blurb is so we can try like selling it or whatever, but you don't really have to try that hard. The next question was, do I need to be extroverted? I'm gonna say yes to that because personally I love being extroverted, so any chance I could get where I was talking with a customer, I wore anime related shirts every day there, and people would always say something to me. If you're on cashier and you don't really want to make a conversation, it's possible. You don't really have to talk to people. But if you are at customer service, like you're gonna have to say, hey, do you need help with anything? What can I help you with? What book are you looking for? So if you're like deathly afraid of people, then I wouldn't really suggest that you work there because it is a customer service job. But I'm not gonna say you need to be the most extroverted person, especially if you're on cashier. You can just do your thing. The next question was, has it affected your reading and your reading taste? And I'm gonna say yes. When you're constantly surrounded by books, it's going to affect your reading and you're going to want to read more, mainly because I got so many recommendations from customers when they saw my anime shirts. They would be checking out some sort of manga and I'd take a picture of it and then I'd read it because it sounded and looked interesting, and that made me want to read more. So I guess that's how it affected my taste. Like when you see customers like buying stuff, obviously you want to check that out. Another question is that, is there any Barnes & Noble myths? I volunteered at a library before and my twin sister works at the same library, so I feel like I've already been surrounded by books and booksellers and book lovers, so I don't really know what myths there are. I would say everyone's a reader. Like that's not the case. Sometimes people just work in retail to work in retail. Some people are also like into music or magazines or like Marvel, and maybe that's another reason they got hired, because we're all nerds there. So yeah, I do have a video on like things that you would relate to if you're a bookseller / librarian, so I'll link that down below. I made that a while ago. The next question, are there any books I have discovered there? And it's mainly just manga and like fantasy books or sci-fi, because I don't really reach for fantasy and sci-fi, so when I see a lot of people checking them out, it gets me interested, because I don't like committing to sci-fi or fantasy series that I don't know a lot about. And then manga, because I make a conversation to anyone who buys manga, and I'm wearing an anime shirt, so it's pretty obvious what I'm trying to do here. I do really want to read Zodiac Academy after working there, because I saw a lot of people check that out. And then a popular manga which I saw checked out a lot was Blood on the Tracks. That sounds really interesting. Next is a book you recommend the most to people, and this was actually a really easy answer, and that is Without Merit by Colleen Hoover. Colleen Hoover is probably the gospel of Barnes & Noble. She and Emily Henry just literally run the entire store. The most popular book checked out at the time, at least when I was working there, was Beach Read and It Ends With Us. And whenever people checked out It Ends With Us, I'm like, hey, Colleen Hoover is mediocre at best. However, Without Merit is my favorite book of hers, and I've gotten so many people to read it. In fact, 2 customers came up to me even and was like, we love this book, do you have any other recommendations? And that made my entire heart, like that was my favorite customer story ever. And then they followed me on Goodreads and I told them about my booktube channel, so it was just like a great experience. Another question is, any surprising things you didn't really expect about Barnes & Noble? Other than that cons list that I gave you about like the adults and management and things like that, I would say retail stuff is just surprising to me. Again, as I said, I worked in food service, which is like a type of customer service, but retail is its own thing, and retail's so much more chill than food service. I saw this TikTok that said retail girlies couldn't work food service, but food service could work retail, and I think that's really true. Just a lot of retail, like scanning and barcoding and how we like market certain items and things we need to say to customers and don't say to customers. That was just surprising. It's kind of like something you learn while working there. It was very much a learning experience. And the last question was, any crazy or funny work experiences? And I can honestly go on a whole video about that. I'm gonna say the rudest customers I dealt with are in Barnes & Noble. I don't know if it's like the entitlement or something, mainly because like when you're in food service, you're literally just making food, but when you're in retail, you're actually interacting with the customers, asking about books. So many old people really get us on our discounts and our membership and everything. Some people just don't like how certain discounts are applied, and it's not up to me, but they don't realize that. You are gonna get customers that genuinely make your day like horrible, but it doesn't really affect me as it affects most people. I've had coworkers that cry in Barnes & Noble and in the cafe. That's just not who I am. I don't really take things that seriously in my entire life, so to me, it was fine. If you are someone that's sensitive, like I would just keep that in mind. But that's that. Please let me know if you have any other Barnes & Noble related questions. I would love to talk about them with you. I love working there. It is my favorite job ever, and I'm so glad that we could even have this conversation. I love y'all so much, and I'll see y'all in the next video.